So this is kind of rewinding a bit back to Mises' view on human action. So he makes this distinction between a priori and a posteriori, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And maybe this is also related to apodictic. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word. I think that's just another way of saying a priori. Could you describe the difference between those for the audience? Because I think this is very critical to understanding not just economics, but really epistemology and philosophy more generally.
Right. So a priori is things you can know. The mnemonic I use is just like this, the word prior is kind of embedded in there. And so it's, like things you can know just by thinking through. Like you don't have to go look out in the world to see whether they're true or not. Whereas a posteriori, again, the mnemonic I use is like there's post in there, like after the fact. Yeah. And so, a posteriori, you have to go observe the world to see, to learn about this. Yeah. So, and you're right, in epistemology, the study of knowledge, how do we come to know things? These are terms like that Kant used a lot, and then I think that's where Mises picked this up from. And there's the other two are analytic and synthetic, and so those are like, so there's like four quadrants. You have synthetic a priori, analytic a priori, a posteriori, synthetic a posteriori, and analytic a posteriori. And then and people argue about whether like synthetic a priori is an empty set or not. Okay. So, what Mises was arguing is that economic science, like the laws of economics or principles of economics, are a priori. And he's saying those are things we can know just through introspection, just thinking about, you don't need to go test it, just like geometry is, right? Going back to that earlier discussion we had, that the way you establish geometric theorems is you just state the axioms, you come up with a deduction, you go through the proof. If you think it's wrong, you have to show me at what step in the chain of reasoning that I make, a deduction that actually wasn't valid. It's not that you go out in the world and test this theory, because that's misunderstanding what you just did. Right. Whereas to say, is Einstein's theory of general relativity, is that true or not? You can't just use introspection. You have to go test and see, like, well, what happens to Mercury in its orbit? Does it actually do what Einstein said, or does it do what Newton said? That kind of stuff. Right. And so, so physics would be an a posteriori science, whereas Mises would say economics is a priori. And then that term apodictic just means like beyond dispute. So yes, if something is a priori and you agree with the deduction, then the result is apodictic.
Beyond dispute.
So that's why, so that's why Mises, uses that term sometimes.
Gotcha. One of the things I was, again, rereading a little bit of Human Action recently, and he makes this point that I think it's that a priori assertions are irrational, actually, versus anything a posteriori is rational. And maybe this is, the axioms themselves are irrational. And I think he means by this that you can't, perhaps what you're saying right here is you can't rationally go out and test it necessarily. It's just deduced. Whereas everything that is deduced can then be tested in the real world. So therefore it's rational. Have I muddied terms there, or is it? Okay.
So and this is how you know that up till now, when I've been saying, yep, that's right, that I wasn't just coddling you, because here I'm going to say that doesn't sound right to me. Like, okay. I'm not sure what could be. I mean, what you might have in mind is, I think he does say something like, the ultimate
givens, I think.
Right. The ultimate givens are not things subject to testing.
Yes.
So I don't think he would say they're irrational, because that means like they violate reason. I think he might just say they're irrational, or they're okay. It could be something like, so like I said, I don't remember what passage you have in mind, but yes,
I think you could imagine non-rational. So that would be irrational, like you're describing. Okay.
Right. So so here, because irrational, has the connotation of that it's against reason, and he certainly thinks a priori truth is reasonable, is consistent with reason.
Yes,
but you're right. He could say the ultimate givens are things that we just accept, and like people act. And
yes,
by the way, on that, Israel Kirzner one time told me, so Kirzner had studied under Mises at NYU, and then I went to NYU when Kirzner was still there. And he mentioned to me in passing that he once asked Mises, how do we know that people act? And that Mises said, through observation. So, it's kind of an interesting thing. So take what you will from that. You know what I mean? Like, it's an interesting, because people might have thought he would say, well, because, you're sitting in a closet and realize I'm going to just assume people. And no, and that kind of circles back to what we were saying, Robert, about you just navigate the world better if you assume, for the sake of argument, that there are other minds at work. Whether you could never really know that in a fundamental sense, but still, come on, that's what you do when you're dealing with other people, is you assume they have inner thoughts like you do.
Yes. So that's very interesting. But there is a leap of faith associated with it, right? You have to choose an axiomatic framing for being and thinking, I guess, even. But that's so interesting.
Yeah, and if you encountered someone too that was like, you might say, oh, they've been brainwashed or they're sleepwalking, and so maybe then you would put more of a box around them and say they're not, acting in a true sense. They're more like reflexive behavior at the moment or something. So but in general, in our social interactions, of course, we are assuming there's other minds at work and they have goals that might be different from ours.
Yes. It's interesting to me, though, that there is that fundamental kernel. I'll use the word faith. I think Mises would say all action is speculative, right? Where we can't know what's going to happen. We just have to actually assume, I guess, or take this little leap of faith. I think it's interesting that underpins, or perhaps even is, inherent to these axioms on which we build all of these other knowledge structures. I don't, for my intuition there is that somehow the religious text and mythology is alluding to that often, the act of faith or whatever. Maybe it's not just some benign belief in a deity. It's actually talking about, praxis in some interesting way.